Bullies steal the poor kid's lunch money. Big mistake. He was a boxing prodigy. Marcus Rivera shuffled through the crowded hallways of Lincoln High School, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floors. At 16, he was barely 5'6" and thin as a rail, his second-hand clothes hanging loosely on his small frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes from the early morning shifts he worked at the local grocery store to help his single mother pay rent. His black hair was perpetually messy, and he kept his head down to avoid the stares and whispers that followed him everywhere he went. The other students at Lincoln High came from families with money, driving cars that cost more than Marcus's family made in a year. Their designer backpacks, expensive phones, and casual conversations about weekend trips to the mountains served as constant reminders that he didn't belong in their world. He was the scholarship kid, the charity case who'd transferred from the rough side of town when his old school got shut down for budget cuts. Marcus clutched his battered backpack tighter as he navigated toward his locker, trying to become invisible among the clusters of laughing teenagers. In his pocket, 5 crumpled dollar bills represented his entire lunch budget for the week. Money his mother had scraped together by returning aluminum cans and skipping her own meals. He'd learned to make those $5 stretch, buying only the cheapest items from the cafeteria vending machines and rationing them carefully. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The voice sent ice through Marcus's veins. Brett Lawson emerged from behind a row of lockers like a predator stalking prey. At 17, Brett was everything Marcus wasn't. Tall, muscular, and blessed with the kind of natural confidence that came from never having to worry about money. His father owned 3 car dealerships in town, and Brett never let anyone forget it. Designer clothes, the latest iPhone, and a brand new BMW in the student parking lot announced his status to anyone who cared to look. Behind Brett stood his usual crew. Tommy Rodriguez, built like a linebacker with hands the size of dinner plates, and Kevin Park, smaller but mean, with cruel eyes that seemed to enjoy other people's pain. They called themselves the Elite Squad, though Marcus privately thought of them as vultures circling wounded prey. "Walking to class, scholarship boy." Brett's voice carried that mocking tone that made Marcus's stomach clench with dread. "Hope you remembered to bring your lunch money today. The Brett Lawson Protection Fund is always accepting donations." Marcus tried to step around them, but Tommy moved to block his path. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in from all sides as other students hurried past, their eyes carefully averted. Everyone at Lincoln High knew the unspoken rule. You didn't interfere with Brett Lawson's business unless you wanted to become his next target. "I don't have any money," Marcus said quietly, which was technically true. The $5 in his pocket was already allocated for lunch, and giving it up would mean going hungry until tomorrow. Brett's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Everyone has money, scholarship boy. It's just a matter of priorities. Now, I'm going to ask you nicely one more time." He held out his hand, palm up, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent lights. "Contribution to the fund. $5 should cover it." Marcus felt his face burn with shame and anger, but he kept his voice steady. "I need that money for lunch." "Lunch?" Kevin snickered. "What are you gonna buy with $5? A bag of chips and a water? Come on, man, live a little. Donate to a worthy cause." "The worthy cause being Brett's weekend entertainment fund," Tommy added, cracking his knuckles meaningfully. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him now, students pretending to organize their lockers while actually watching the drama unfold. Phones were already being pulled out, ready to record whatever happened next. At Lincoln High, humiliation was currency, and Brett was about to make a substantial withdrawal from Marcus's dignity. "Please," Marcus said, hating how desperate he sounded. "I'll pay you back tomorrow. I just need—" "You'll pay me back?" Brett's voice rose with mock outrage. "You'll pay me back with what? Your mum's tip money from cleaning rich people's houses." The cafeteria reference hit like a physical blow. Marcus's mother did indeed work as a housekeeper for several wealthy families in town, scrubbing their toilets and washing their dishes for barely above minimum wage. It was honest work, dignified work, but Brett made it sound dirty and shameful. "Don't talk about my mother," Marcus said quietly, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Brett leaned in closer, close enough that Marcus could smell his expensive cologne and see the cruel satisfaction in his eyes. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? What's she gonna do? Come here and mop the floors in my defense?" Something snapped inside Marcus's chest, a carefully maintained barrier that had been holding back years of training and instinct. For just a moment, his body shifted automatically into a fighting stance. Weight balanced on the balls of his feet, hands loose and ready, chin tucked slightly. It was muscle memory from countless hours in the gym, from a life that felt like a distant dream. But then reality crashed back in. This wasn't the boxing ring at Rivera's gym, where his father had trained him since he was 8 years old. This wasn't the place where Miguel Rivera, former Golden Gloves champion, had taught his son every technique, every combination, every hard-earned lesson about discipline and respect. That world had died 3 years ago in a car accident, along with his father and their comfortable middle-class life. After the funeral, everything had fallen apart. The gym closed when they couldn't afford the lease. His mother took whatever job she could find, and Marcus made a promise to himself and to his father's memory. He would never use his fists outside the ring. Violence had taken his father away from him in that accident, and he wouldn't let it consume him too. Marcus forced himself to relax, to step back down from the precipice of violence. "Just leave me alone," he muttered, reaching into his pocket for the crumpled bills. "That's more like it," Brett said with satisfaction, watching as Marcus's fingers closed around the money. "See how easy that was? Why do we have to go through this song and dance every time?" Every time. That was the problem. This wasn't the first time Brett had demanded his lunch money, and it wouldn't be the last. It had started small, $1 here, 50 cents there, always with the pretense that it was some kind of joke or harmless tradition. But as Marcus's passive resistance made it clear he wouldn't fight back, the demands had escalated. "I don't have $5, Marcus said, pulling out 3 wrinkled singles. "This is all I have." Brett's expression darkened. "That's not going to work for me, scholarship boy. $5 was the price. If you can't afford the full amount, maybe we need to discuss alternative payment methods." Marcus looked at the $3 in his hand, knowing it represented less than half his lunch budget for the week. Giving it up meant going hungry, but refusing might mean something much worse. $5, Brett repeated, his voice taking on an edge that made nearby students step further away. "Or maybe we need to have a more serious conversation about your place in this school." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus could feel the weight of every stare, every phone camera pointed in his direction, every whispered comment that would follow him through the halls for weeks to come. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "In the ring, you fight with honor. Outside the ring, you walk away with dignity." But where was the dignity in this? Where was the honor in being systematically humiliated while everyone watched and did nothing? Marcus handed over the $3, his face burning with shame. "That's all I have," he repeated. Brett pocketed the money with theatrical satisfaction. "Well then, I guess we'll have to call this a down payment. You can bring me the other $2 tomorrow, plus interest. Let's say $3 total for the inconvenience." "That's not fair," Marcus said quietly. "Fair?" Brett's laugh was sharp and cruel. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that you get to attend this school on scholarship while students who actually belong here have to compete for spots? Is it fair that you take up space that could go to someone whose family actually contributes to this community?" Tommy and Kevin nodded along like faithful disciples, though Marcus suspected they were just as uncomfortable with Brett's cruelty as everyone else. They'd learned, like most people, that it was easier to go along with Brett Lawson than to stand up to him. "I earned my place here," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Earned it?" Brett's voice dripped with mock surprise. "With what? Your sob story about your dead dad and your cleaning lady mom? Please. You're here because some liberal administrator decided this school needed more diversity, and you were the best charity case they could find." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Marcus felt tears threatening behind his eyes, but he refused to give Brett the satisfaction of seeing him cry. Instead, he turned and started walking away, leaving behind the laughter and whispers that followed him like a toxic cloud. He made it to the bathroom before the emotions overwhelmed him. Locking himself in a stall, Marcus let the frustration and humiliation wash over him. In his mind, he could see his father's face, could hear Miguel Rivera's voice explaining the sweet science of boxing. "Every fighter has a choice," his father had said during one of their last training sessions. "You can fight with anger, or you can fight with purpose. Anger makes you sloppy, makes you stupid. Purpose makes you precise, makes you powerful." But what was the purpose in this situation? What was the point of having skills if you couldn't use them when you needed them most? Marcus knew he could drop Brett Lawson with a single clean shot. Years of training had given him hand speed and power that would shock anyone who judged him by his size. He'd sparred with grown men, competed in amateur tournaments, held his own against opponents who outweighed him by 40 pounds. But none of that mattered outside the ring. Outside the ring, violence only led to more violence, and Marcus couldn't afford to get suspended or expelled. His scholarship depended on maintaining good grades and staying out of trouble. One fight, one moment of lost control, and he'd lose everything his family had sacrificed for. The harassment continued to escalate over the following weeks. Brett seemed to take Marcus's passivity as permission to push harder, to demand more, to inflict greater humiliations. The daily lunch money extortion became just one part of a systematic campaign of cruelty designed to break Marcus's spirit. Accidental shoulder checks in the hallway became regular occurrences, always timed when teachers weren't looking. Marcus's locker was vandalized with spray-painted words like charity and welfare, the maintenance crew cleaning it off, but never fast enough to prevent dozens of students from seeing it. His backpack was accidentally knocked from his hands, spilling his books and papers across the floor while Brett and his friends watched with amusement. But it was the psychological warfare that hurt the most. Brett had a talent for finding Marcus's most vulnerable spots and pressing on them with surgical precision. Comments about his father's death, his mother's job, his second-hand clothes, and his scholarship status became a daily soundtrack of humiliation. "Hey, scholarship boy," Brett would call out in the cafeteria, loud enough for half the school to hear. "How's your mom enjoying her new job? I heard the Johnsons fired her for stealing. Is that where you get your lunch money now?" The lies were almost worse than the truth. Marcus's mother had never been fired, had never stolen anything, but the rumors spread through the school like wildfire. Students who had previously ignored him now looked at him with suspicion or pity. Teachers who had seemed supportive became more distant, as if they were questioning whether he really belonged at Lincoln High. 3 weeks into the school year, Marcus had lost 12 pounds from skipping meals to pay Brett's daily tax. His grades were starting to slip as he spent more time working extra shifts at the grocery store to make up for the lost money. Dark circles under his eyes had deepened, and his clothes hung even more loosely on his shrinking frame. His mother noticed, of course. Elena Rivera wasn't the kind of woman who missed details, especially when it came to her only child. "Mijo, you're not eating enough," she said one evening as they sat at their small kitchen table, sharing a dinner of rice and beans that she'd stretched to last 2 meals. "Are you having problems at school?" Marcus looked at his mother's worried face, seeing the exhaustion lines that came from working 16-hour days to keep them afloat. She was already carrying so much weight, so much responsibility. How could he add his problems to her burden? "I'm fine, Mama," he lied, "just busy with schoolwork." Eleanor studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's true intentions through years of cleaning their most private spaces. "Marcus, you know you can tell me anything, right? If someone is giving you trouble." "I said I'm fine," Marcus repeated, his voice sharper than he'd intended. The hurt that flashed across his mother's face made him immediately regret his tone, but the damage was done. That night, lying in bed and listening to his mother's exhausted breathing through the thin walls of their apartment, Marcus stared at the framed photo on his nightstand. It showed him and his father at the gym, both of them grinning and holding up boxing gloves after Marcus had won his first amateur tournament. He'd been 13 then, already showing real promise in the ring. "You've got natural talent, mijo," his father had said that day. "But talent without discipline is just wasted potential. The ring will teach you about yourself, about what you're made of when everything else is stripped away." Marcus knew what he was made of. He'd proven it dozens of times in sanctioned matches against opponents who came at him with everything they had. But those fights had rules, referees, safety equipment. They had honor and respect, even in defeat. What Brett was doing wasn't fighting. It was systematic cruelty, designed to break him down piece by piece until there was nothing left but compliance and fear. And the worst part was that Marcus's refusal to defend himself was only making it worse. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus arrived at school to find his locker vandalized again, but this time the damage was worse. Someone had broken the lock and dumped the contents all over the hallway floor. His textbooks were scattered and torn, his notebooks soaked with what smelled like energy drink, and his only photo of his father, the one he kept taped inside his locker door, was crumpled and stepped on. Students walked past the mess, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to help. Marcus knelt in the hallway, trying to salvage what he could, his hands shaking as he carefully smoothed out the damaged photograph. "Oops," came Brett's voice from behind him. "Looks like someone had an accident with their locker. That's too bad." Marcus didn't turn around. He couldn't trust himself to look at Brett's smirking face without doing something he'd regret. Instead, he continued gathering his ruined belongings, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You know," Brett continued, his voice taking on that familiar mocking tone, "maybe this wouldn't happen if you paid your fees on time. The protection fund exists for a reason. Leave him alone." The voice came from somewhere behind Brett, soft but clear. Marcus looked up to see Jessica Martinez standing near her locker with a stack of books in her arms. She was one of the quiet kids too, but unlike Marcus, she seemed to fade into the background by choice rather than circumstance. She was pretty in an understated way, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that usually stayed focused on her studies. Brett's attention shifted to her like a predator scenting new prey. Well, well, looks like Scholarship Boy has a girlfriend. How cute." Jessica's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. "I said leave him alone. He hasn't done anything to you." "Hasn't done anything?" Brett's voice rose with theatrical outrage. "He's taking up space that belongs to real students. He's here on charity, stealing opportunities from kids who actually deserve them." Tommy and Kevin had moved to flank Jessica now, forming their usual triangle of intimidation. Marcus felt his chest tighten with a familiar rage, the same feeling he'd gotten in the ring when an opponent threw a cheap shot or fought dirty. "Just ignore them," Jessica whispered to Marcus. "They're not worth it." But they were worth it. Not because of what they were doing to him. Marcus had learned to absorb that kind of punishment. They were worth it because now they were threatening Jessica, someone whose only crime was showing him a moment of basic human decency. "You know what I think?" Brett said, his voice carrying that edge that meant real trouble was coming. "I think our little charity case here has been holding out on us. I think he's got more money than he lets on." He gestured to Tommy, who grabbed Marcus's backpack and dumped its contents across the floor. Marcus's work uniform tumbled out, along with his worn textbooks, a half-eaten granola bar he'd been saving for lunch, and his wallet. Brett snatched up the wallet and opened it, finding the $20 bill Marcus had been saving for his mother's birthday next week. "Well, well," Brett said with mock surprise. "What do we have here? Looks like Scholarship Boy has been lying to us." "That's not mine to give," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "It's for my mother's birthday." Brett held the 20 up to the light as if checking for counterfeits. "Your mother's birthday? How sweet. But see, you owe me quite a bit of back payments plus interest. I think this just about covers it." "Give it back," Marcus said, standing slowly. Something in his voice made Brett pause. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across the bully's face. Marcus was standing differently now, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, his hands loose at his sides. Everything about his posture screamed danger to anyone who knew how to read the signs. But Brett Lawson wasn't one of those people. "Or what?" he said, pocketing the 20. "You gonna do something about it, Scholarship Boy? You gonna finally grow a spine?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment, seeing not just Brett, but every bully who'd ever used their size or status to hurt someone weaker. He thought about his father, about the promise he'd made, about the violence that had torn his family apart in that car accident 3 years ago. Then he thought about Jessica, about her courage in speaking up when no one else would. He thought about his mother, working 16-hour days and still finding ways to smile. He thought about that $20 bill, earned through hours of mopping floors and stocking shelves, meant to buy the only gift he could afford for the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. Sometimes, Marcus realized, keeping one promise meant breaking another. "Yeah," he said quietly, his voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby students stop and stare. "I think I am." Brett threw the first punch, a wild right hand that telegraphed itself from 3 feet away. In the old days, before the promise, before the guilt, Marcus would have slipped it easily and countered with devastating precision. This time was no different. Marcus moved like water, slipping Brett's punch by inches and coming back with a textbook-perfect left hook that caught the bigger boy right on the button. Brett's eyes rolled back and he dropped like a stone, his expensive sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The hallway erupted in shocked silence. Tommy rushed forward, his massive frame moving with surprising speed, but Marcus was already in motion. 3 years of ring rust fell away like an old coat as muscle memory took over. He ducked under Tommy's wild swing and drove a precise uppercut into the bigger boy's solar plexus, folding him in half. Kevin tried to grab Marcus from behind, but Marcus had heard his footsteps. A boxer learns to use all his senses. He spun, breaking Kevin's grip with a technique his father had drilled into him thousands of times, and followed up with a clean right cross that sent Kevin stumbling backward into a row of lockers. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 bigger, stronger opponents lay on the ground, groaning and struggling to catch their breath, while Marcus stood over them, barely breathing hard. The crowd of students that had gathered was silent, their phones out and recording, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. "Here's how this works," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. He looked down at Brett, who was struggling to sit up with blood trickling from his nose. "You're going to give me back my money, all of it, every dollar you've taken from me over the past month." Brett wiped blood from his nose with a shaking hand. "This isn't over." Marcus crouched down so he was eye level with the fallen bully. "Yes, it is, because if you ever touch me again, if you ever demand money from anyone else, if you ever make someone feel small just because you can, I'll be there. And next time, I won't hold back." He stood and offered his hand to Jessica, helping her gather her scattered books while ignoring the phones that were still recording and the growing crowd of students who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. The quiet scholarship kid, the easy target, the charity case, had just dismantled 3 bigger opponents with surgical precision. Brett struggled to his feet, his designer clothes wrinkled and his ego bruised worse than his face. "You think this makes you tough? You think this changes anything?" Marcus turned back to face him, and for the first time in months, his voice carried real authority. "I think it changes everything. The question is whether you're smart enough to figure that out." Principal Williams arrived within minutes, summoned by the commotion and the flood of social media posts that were already spreading through the school. Marcus expected suspension, expulsion, maybe even criminal charges. Instead, he found himself sitting in the principal's office, listening to a parade of student testimonies about Brett's systematic bullying campaign. "It seems," Principal Williams said carefully, studying the statements piled on his desk, "that this incident was the result of ongoing harassment that our staff failed to address properly." He looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "While I cannot officially condone fighting, I understand that sometimes people are pushed beyond reasonable limits." Brett, sporting a bandaged nose and a severely bruised ego, sat in the corner with his parents. His father, a prominent businessman who donated significantly to the school's athletic programs, was red-faced with embarrassment. His mother kept shooting worried glances at Marcus, as if she couldn't quite believe her son had been bested by someone half his size. "There will be consequences for everyone involved," the principal continued, "but given the circumstances and the testimonies we've received, I think in-school suspension would be appropriate rather than expulsion." Marcus nodded, accepting the punishment. It was fair, even lenient considering what could have happened, but more importantly, it sent a message to every other bully in the school. Actions have consequences, and sometimes the quiet kids aren't as helpless as they seem. The video of the fight went viral within hours, spreading far beyond the walls of Lincoln High. Students who had never spoken to Marcus before approached him in the halls, some to congratulate him, others to share their own stories of being bullied. Teachers who had previously overlooked him began including him in class discussions, treating him with newfound respect. But the biggest change was in Marcus himself. He walked taller now, spoke with more confidence, and no longer felt the need to make himself invisible. He wasn't looking for fights, but he wasn't running from confrontation either. Word had spread about his boxing background, and suddenly everyone wanted to know his story. Jessica, who had found her own courage in Marcus's example, became his closest friend at school. She told him later that watching him stand up to Brett had inspired her to speak up in class, to join the debate team, to stop hiding her intelligence behind a mask of invisibility. "You showed me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of," she said one day as they sat together at lunch, at a table that was no longer empty. "It's something to be proud of." Brett, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale. The video of his defeat had humiliated him in front of the entire school, and his reputation as an unstoppable force had been shattered in less than 30 seconds. His core group of friends remained loyal, but the fear and automatic respect he'd commanded were gone forever. Marcus saw him sometimes in the halls, walking with his head down, probably feeling some small fraction of the humiliation he'd inflicted on others. Part of Marcus felt sorry for him, understanding now that bullies were often victims themselves, acting out their own pain and insecurity on easier targets. But mostly, Marcus felt satisfied that justice had been served. He'd kept his promise to his father in spirit, if not in letter, using violence only as a last resort, and only to protect himself and someone who couldn't protect themselves. And he'd used it with restraint and precision, never crossing the line from self-defense to aggression. The incident had changed more than just the dynamics between Marcus and Brett. It had sent ripples throughout the entire school, empowering other victims to speak up and making potential bullies think twice before targeting someone who seemed vulnerable. Teachers paid closer attention to social dynamics in their classrooms. Students were more likely to intervene when they saw harassment happening. Most importantly, Marcus had learned that strength wasn't just about the ability to throw a punch or take one. Real strength was about standing up for what was right, even when it was scary. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was about refusing to let fear dictate your actions or define your character. As Marcus walked through the halls of Lincoln High now, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. He wore his second-hand clothes with pride, ate his simple lunches without shame, and faced each day knowing that he belonged there just as much as anyone else. The scholarship kid, who had once been seen as an easy target, had become something much more valuable. A reminder that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest statements when they finally decide to speak.